How would you feel if you were told that you had 3 months to live, only to discover months later that the hospital had mistakenly given you someone else's test result and that you weren't dying after all? This is the story of two women whose test results were swapped in the hospital, a mistake that almost cost them their life and everything in it. It all began on one cold morning in the popular Riverstone Hospital. Two women sat in their separate hospital wards, anticipating the results of their just concluded test. Nimi Johnson was a wealthy businesswoman who slumped and fell in her office the day before. She was rushed to the hospital, and a series of tests were carried out on her to ascertain the cause of her collapse. Nimi had always been the picture of health, never imagining that something could be seriously wrong. Her life revolved around her booming company, international business trips, and luxury events. Sitting in the hospital ward now, she felt uneasy for the very first time. She wasn't used to being vulnerable. In the adjacent ward sat Binta, a middle-aged woman from a humble background. For years, she had battled an illness that no doctor had been able to diagnose. Endless trips to the hospital, traditional healers, and herbalists had drained her financially and emotionally. Her family had exhausted all their savings trying to find a cure to her ailment, and Binta was at the verge of losing hope. However, on one evening, an old friend of Binta paid her a visit and informed her of a specialist doctor at Riverstone Hospital who had the reputation for solving mysterious medical issues. She encouraged Binta to try one last time, promising that this visit could be the answer that they had been praying for. And Binta, being so desperate, decided to pay the doctor a visit. Now, as Binta sat in the hospital ward, she thought about all the pain she had endured. Each visit to the hospital had ended the same way: inconclusive tests, vague diagnosis, and no real answer. But somehow, this time felt different. Maybe it was because she had finally found a reputable hospital, or perhaps it was the belief that after all these years, something had to give. Dr. Sheyi, the doctor on call at Riverstone, reviewed both women's results. Nimi's tests were clear. Nothing was wrong with her. Her collapse had likely been due to exhaustion from her busy lifestyle. Binta's results, however, revealed that she suffered from a rare disease that was killing her slowly. She had only a few months to live if she didn't start treatment immediately. But as Dr. Sheyi scribbled notes in the files, a simple clerical error was made. Nimi's name was placed on Binta's file, and Binta's name was placed on Nimi's. What followed was a tragedy, born from that single moment of human error. Dr. Shea first went to Nimi, holding her file in hand, ready to deliver what he believed to be the truth. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, "I'm afraid the test results have shown that you are suffering from a rare disease and have about 3 months to live. Your body is gradually losing its strength, and it is advisable that you slow down completely on work and focus on you spending your last moments with your family." Nimi stared at the doctor shocked, her world crumbling before her eyes. She was a woman of action, someone who thrived in solving problems, but this was something she had no control over. She had never imagined that something so catastrophic could ever happen to her. She had just struck a very huge deal at her company and looked forward to finally traveling the world after working so hard for over 20 years. Now, here she was, being told that she had 3 months to live. Nimi could not contain her tears. She sobbed uncontrollably, remembering her husband and daughter, who she loved so dearly. The thought of leaving them behind shattered her very heart as she pondered on how to let them know that she had only 3 months to live. How could she tell her husband, her daughter? How could she find the words to explain that her time with them was running out? In the adjacent ward, however, Binta received a different news. Dr. Shea entered her room, wearing a gentle smile. "Mrs. Daly, I have good news for you. Your tests show no signs of serious illness. You're healthy. There's nothing life threatening in your results, so you can go home and live your life freely. Binta was speechless. After years of suffering and endless visits to the hospital, someone was finally telling her she was free. She felt lightheaded, overwhelmed with relief. Tears welled up in her eyes as she thanked the doctor repeatedly. The weight that had burdened her heart for years lifted in an instant. She could hardly believe it, but the doctor's words filled her with a joy she hadn't felt in a very long time. As days turned into weeks, the women's life transformed in opposite directions. Nimi, consumed by the belief that she was dying, began to withdraw from her business and family. She wrote her will, made peace with the inevitable, and started counting down the days, waiting for the moment of her death. She saw symptoms in her body that she had never noticed before: aches, fatigue, and weakness that seemed to confirm the doctor's diagnosis. Her body, once full of energy, now felt frail and weak. The mere belief that her life was nearing its end was enough to convince her mind and body that it was true. On the other hand, Binta's life blossomed. For the first time in years, she embraced life without the shadow of sickness hanging over her. She started eating better, exercising, and reconnecting with old friends. She no longer felt the heavy burden of uncertainty. In fact, her body began to respond to the happiness that now filled her heart. Her chronic pain disappeared, and Binta felt stronger and more alive than ever before. She returned to her daily duties, happy to have been miraculously healed, but the truth was only a matter of time. One day, as Nimi's condition worsened, her husband insisted on seeking a second opinion at another hospital. Nimi kicked against the idea, stating that there was no point. All efforts by her husband to make her retake the test proved futile, as Nimi was not ready to do so. Back at her company, however, the news of her condition spread like wildfire. Majority of her staff felt so terrible to hear about her condition. However, a small group saw this as a way of enriching themselves. She won't be here for long, they thought to themselves as they began to plot on how to take over the company. As Nimi continued to withdraw from her business, her absence created a vacuum at the top. Meetings were held in secret, plans were made to take advantage of Nimi's deteriorating state, and slowly, cracks began to form within the company's leadership. Mr. Tope Adeniyi, Nimi's most trusted staff, headed the scheme to take over the company from Nimi. He believed that after working with Nimi for almost 10 years, his services to the company had not been adequately appreciated. He sought the help of some key senior staff members who were equally dissatisfied and eager to take control. Together, they began plotting a hostile takeover of the company, strategically positioning themselves to assume power as soon as Nimi was too weak to manage. Tope envisioned himself as the new head of the company, thinking that Nimi's inevitable absence would soon leave him at the helm of activities. He believed his years of service and loyalty had earned him the right to step into the spotlight, despite the betrayal he was now orchestrating. It was not long before the news of their evil plan reached the ears of Nimi, who could not believe what Tope was doing. Weak and emotionally drained, Nimi could hardly believe the betrayal unfolding before her eyes. Tope Adeniyi, the man she had trusted for almost a decade, was scheming behind her back, preparing to take over the company she had built with her sweat and sacrifices. The news hit her harder than a false diagnosis itself. Betrayal by a close ally was a blow she never saw coming. Though consumed by the belief that her end was near, this new revelation ignited something in Nimi. She realized she could not just sit back and watch everything she had built collapse. Gathering whatever strength she had left, Nimi decided to resume work. She got up from her bed and quickly got dressed to head to the office. This was the first time she was going to the office since her diagnosis, and Nimi could not sit back and watch her hard work being snatched from under her nose. She couldn't let Tope or anyone else dismantle the empire that she had spent her life building. As Nimi entered her office, whispers filled the halls. Her unexpected presence took everyone by surprise. Tope, who had been smugly organizing his takeover, froze when he saw Nimi walk into the boardroom. His face, once filled with confidence, turned pale as Nimi fixed her gaze on him and walked past without a word. She walked into her office, shutting the door behind her, filling the entire atmosphere with panic. Tope stood there shaking, unsure of what Nimi had up her sleeves. Her stern look towards him earlier told him that she knew everything. He could feel the walls closing in on him, but he wasn't prepared to give up just yet. He quickly gathered the conspirators for a meeting, hoping to salvage the situation and speed up their plans. They knew that Tope was too weak to fight for her company, so they convinced the members of the board of directors of the company to declare Tope unfit to head the company, owing to her poor health and the fact that she had a few weeks left to live. Nimi could not believe how fast things had changed. Tope, the man she made into who he was today, was fighting to take over her company, not remembering all she had ever done for him. The time she saved his life, when a careless driver knocked him down and left him for dead. At the time, Tope was a poor beggar on the street who had no home and no one to care for him. Nimi had taken him in, paid for his medical bills, given him a job, and mentored him until he became her most trusted confidant. Now, he was repaying her kindness with betrayal, scheming to take over everything that she had built. The pain of this realization weighed heavily on her heart, but Nimi knew that she had to act swiftly to protect her legacy. Meanwhile, Binta was still living her life with the impression that she had been miraculously healed. She agreed to get married to a man who she loved with all of her heart. They had been friends for a very long time, and Binta, believing that she was fully healed, decided to finally settle down. Her wedding was in a few days, and everything seemed perfect, except for the growing tension between her sister Zara and herself. Zara had always been protective of Binta, especially during her years of illness. But since Binta had been given the miraculous news of her recovery, things had shifted. Zara, who had put much of her own life on hold to care for her sister, felt overlooked and unappreciated. It seemed to her that everyone, including Binta, had forgotten the sacrifices she made during her long years of illness. And now, with the wedding approaching, Zara's frustration had reached a boiling point. The arguments first started over something so minute. It was a disagreement about the guest list of Binta's wedding. Zara pleaded with her sister to allow her invite a few friends for the wedding, but Binta had already finalized the list and wasn't willing to make changes at the last minute. "I'm telling you, we don't have room for any more guests," Binta said to her sister Zara, her voice filled with irritation as she folded a bright lace fabric meant for her bridesmaids. "We've planned this wedding to the last detail, Zara. I can't just start adding random people." Zara crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "I'm not talking about just anyone, Binta. These are people who were there for us when you were sick. They prayed for you, they supported our family, and now, when you're finally getting married, you want to exclude them?" Binta sighed as she stood and listened to her sister. "I appreciate everything they did, I really do, but I've already made arrangements. This is not about who helped me in the past, it's about what works for us." Zara's eyes were now filled with hurt as she spoke. "What works for you, you mean? Everything is always about you now, isn't it? You're getting married, you're healthy, you have your whole life ahead of you. Meanwhile, I put everything on hold for years, and now it's like none of that matters. You're acting like the past never happened." Binta looked up shocked by the bitterness in her sister's voice. She informed her sister how grateful she was for all she did for her, but before Binta could finish speaking, Zara interrupted her, spitting vile comments, not caring about the effects of her words. "You're grateful?" Zara asked, her voice rising. "Grateful? That's it? I give up everything for you. I quit my job. I lost my relationship. And I spent years taking care of you when no one else would. And now that you're healthy and getting married, you act like none of that matters. Binta's heart raced as she saw the pain in her sister's eyes. However, instead of addressing the problem, she began to act defensively. Zara, I didn't ask you to sacrifice your life for me. You made those choices, and now you're trying to make me feel guilty because I'm finally happy. I'm grateful for everything you did, but I can't keep living my life walking on eggshells, all because you helped me. If this is how you would lord this over me, then you shouldn't have helped me because no one forced you to help. Zara, filled with so much anger, looked her sister in the eyes and wished that she would die. The room fell silent after Zara's words. Her face flushed with anger, and her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths as the venom of her statement settled between them. Binta's eyes widened in shock, her heart pounding in her chest as her sister's cruel words echoed in her ears repeatedly. The weight of what Zara had just said made the air feel so heavy and suffocating. She couldn't believe that her sister, who had been by her side through her darkest moments, could wish her dead. Filled with so much anger, Binta slapped her sister hard across the face for spitting such vile words, and Zara, without thinking twice, hit her sister back repeatedly, cursing and wishing that she dies. Just as they exchanged punches, Binta felt a sharp pain in her stomach and began to scream. Zara, although agitated, could not ignore her sister's cries as she rushed her to the hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, Binta was in so much pain, a kind of pain that she had never felt before. Her sister Zara could not believe what was happening. Binta's sudden decline troubled her heart as she believed she was the cause. As they wheeled Binta into the emergency room, a new doctor, Dr. Sibajo, attended to her. His expression darkened as he examined her scan results. Binta, rarely able to speak, winced in pain as she managed to ask the doctor what the problem was. Dr. Sibajo hesitated for a moment before responding. Miss Binta, I'm afraid your condition is far worse than you may have been led to believe. The scans show that your disease has progressed rapidly. Binta's face paled as his words sank in. But I was told I was fine. I was given a clean bill of health a few months ago. Dr. Sheyi told me I was healed, she said, her voice shaking with desperation. Dr. Sibajo looked confused, flipping through her records. Are you sure? Your current scans indicate that your condition has deteriorated. I'm sorry, but it looks like you may have only 2 weeks left to live. There must have been a mistake. Binta's heart sank into her stomach. The news hit her like a sledgehammer, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. This can't be right, she whispered, her voice weak. How could this be? I was told I was perfectly fine. She held on tightly to the hospital sheets as she let out a very painful cry. Dr. Sibajo could not help but feel concerned. Her allegation kept ringing in his head as he decided to investigate it further. He looked back at the records again, trying to piece together the puzzle. He decided to approach Dr. Sheyi, who Binta alleged had given her the results a few months ago. Dr. Sheyi, on hearing this, shone his eye in shock, realizing the grave mistake that he had made. Nimi, who was told that she had 3 months to live, was in her office, struggling to gain control of her company when Dr. Sheyi's call came through. Mrs. Johnson, Dr. Sheyi began, his voice filled with guilt. I don't know how to say this, but there's been a terrible mistake. The test results we gave you a few months ago, they weren't yours. There was a mix-up, and we gave you someone else's diagnosis. You're not dying, Mrs. Johnson. You were never dying. Nimi could feel her world stop for a second. Her life, which had already crumbled, seemed to shatter again, but this time in a completely different way. Nimi stood frozen, the phone pressed against her ear as Dr. Sheyi's words echoed in her mind. You're not dying. You will never die. The weight of the past few months spent grieving, preparing for death, withdrawing from her life was all based on a lie. Are you sure? Nimi stammered, barely able to catch her breath. This can't be real. I was told I had 3 months and my body has been failing me. I deeply regret the error, Mrs. Johnson, Dr. Sheyi said, his voice heavy with remorse. We've only just discovered the mistake after further reviewing both your records and those of another patient. I take full responsibility. I don't expect you to forgive this easily, but I thought you should know the truth. Nimi's hands trembled as she set the phone down, unable to process the enormity of what had just happened. All the choices she had made, pushing away her family, stepping back from her company, preparing for death, had been based on a false medical result. She wasn't dying. She still had her life, but she had lost precious months, and in many ways, she felt as though a part of her had already died. Meanwhile, at Riverstone Hospital, Binta's cries filled the room as she held her stomach in agony. The reality of her fate, so cruel and unexpected, was too much to bear. Her sister Zara stood by her side broken with guilt and regret, knowing that her own harsh words had been spoken just hours before. She had wished death upon her sister in a fit of rage, and now death was looming over them both. Dr. Sheyi walked into the room, his face filled with sorrow. He had just come from informing Nimi about the mix-up, and now he had to face the woman whose life he had unknowingly destroyed. Binta, he began softly, I'm so sorry. There was a terrible error in your diagnosis months ago. You should have been told about your condition earlier. This was my mistake and I am so sorry. Binta looked up at him, her eyes filled with both pain and confusion. You told me I was fine, that I was healed. I believed you. How could this happen? Zara stood back, biting her lip, feeling helpless as she watched her sister's despair grow deeper. I don't have much time left, do I? Binta asked Dr. Sheyi, who informed her that she had less than 2 weeks to live. I am deeply sorry, Binta, he said, watching her wail in pain as he promised to take full responsibility for his mistakes. Nimi, after receiving the devastating news, found herself faced with a different reality. She had spent months preparing to die, but now she had to confront the fact that she had more time than she had thought. She took a deep breath and gathered her strength, mentally preparing herself for the fight ahead. She had to stop Tope and his co-conspirators before they completely dismantled everything that she had built. So, Nimi came up with a plan to teach Tope a lesson he would never forget. The next morning, Nimi arrived at her office with a renewed sense of purpose. She had already begun to set her plan in motion, discreetly enlisting the help of a few trusted colleagues who had remained loyal to her. The plan was simple: make Tope believe that he had already won and then pull the rug from under him at the perfect moment. First, Nimi sent a memo to the company announcing that she would be stepping down due to her health condition, seemingly playing into the very narrative that Tope and his co-conspirators had been waiting for. The announcement spread quickly, and Tope, believing his victory was at hand, wasted no time in preparing for his ascension to power. He held secret meetings with senior staff members, making promises of promotions and greater influence once he took control. Behind the scenes, Nimi worked tirelessly. She contacted the board of directors, revealing the evidence of Tope's betrayal. She presented them with documents and recordings that she had gathered, showcasing how Tope had manipulated key staff members and had been preparing to take over the company while believing she was dying. The board members were outraged, and Nimi knew that she had them on her side. Then came the day of Tope's big announcement. He stood in the boardroom, beaming with confidence as he prepared to declare himself as the new head of the company. The board members were present, along with other senior staff. Nimi, seemingly weak and withdrawn, sat quietly in the corner of the room, watching the scene unfold. To all of you who have supported me through this transition, Tope began, I want to thank you. It is with a heavy heart that I take on the responsibility of leading this company, but I assure you, I will continue the legacy that Nimi Johnson has built. Just as Tope was about to continue, Nimi stood up, her voice steady but commanding. "Thank you, Tope," she said, her tone laced with sarcasm, "but I'm afraid your leadership is going to be much more shorter than you anticipated." The room went silent. Tope's face drained of color as he realized something was terribly wrong. Nimi stepped forward, pulling out a folder and placing it on the table. "I have evidence of your betrayal," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "You plotted to take over this company. While I was supposedly dying, you lied, manipulated, and betrayed me." Nimi opened the folder, revealing the documents and recordings. The board members leaned forward, their expressions hardening as they reviewed the evidence. Tope's once confident posture crumbled. "I trusted you, Tope," Nimi continued, her voice unwavering. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me? By trying to steal what I've worked for my entire life?" Tope stammered, trying to find the words to defend himself, but it was too late. The board had already made their decision. "Tope Adeniyi," the chairman of the board said, standing up, "you are hereby dismissed from this company, effective immediately. We will not tolerate betrayal at any level." Tope stood there frozen in shock. The weight of his actions crashed down on him all at once. He had lost everything: the power he craved, the position he thought he deserved, and most importantly, the trust of the one person who had lifted him from poverty and given him a chance. As security escorted him out of the building, Nimi watched with satisfaction. She had reclaimed her company, her legacy, and her power, while Tope learned the harshest lesson of his life. Just as Nimi sat in her office, she received a visit from someone she never expected to see in her office: Mr. Jaja, a man who she had tried on several occasions to see, a well sought after investor who Nimi had prayed would invest in her company for years. Mr. Jaja was a legend in the business world, an elusive, high sought after investor who only backed companies that he believed had immense potential. His presence in Nimi's office was nothing short of a miracle, especially at such a critical moment. For years, Nimi had tried to gain his attention, sending proposals, making pitches, and even attending exclusive business events where he was rumored to be present, but nothing had ever come of it. Now, here he was, standing in her office, seemingly out of nowhere. Nimi quickly composed herself, brushing off the lingering effect of the confrontation with Tope. She had no idea what brought Mr. Jaja here, but she was determined to seize the opportunity. With a warm but curious smile, she greeted him. "Mr. Jaja, I must say I'm quite surprised to see you here. What brings you to my company today?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with excitement. Mr. Jaja smiled, his tall, imposing figure casting a shadow across her desk. "Mrs. Johnson, I've been following your company for a long time, and I must say that I am more than impressed. BA Holdings has impressed me for years, but I wanted to see how you handled adversity before making any decisions." Nimi raised an eyebrow as she continued to listen to what he had to say. Mr. Jaja, settling into the chair opposite her, revealed to her that in business, anyone can thrive when things are good, but it's how a leader navigates challenges that reveals their true worth. "I've heard about your health scare, the rumors spreading around your company, and even about Mr. Adeniyi's betrayal, and I've watched how you responded." Nimi's breath almost seized. She had not realized that her personal and business struggles were being observed so closely, especially by someone as influential as Mr. Jaja. She remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "You didn't crumble under pressure. You took decisive action, even when everything seemed to be falling apart around you. That kind of leadership is rare, and it's exactly the kind of leadership I want to invest in." Nimi's heart raced. Could it be? Was this finally the moment she had been waiting for? But she knew better than to let her emotions show too quickly. Instead, she kept her tone measured. "I'm honored to hear that from you, Mr. Jaja. But what exactly are you proposing?" Mr. Jaja leaned forward, his expression serious but calm. "I want to invest in your company, Mrs. Johnson. A substantial investment that will not only stabilize your operations but propel you into new markets. I believe your company has the potential to expand internationally and reach heights you've only dreamed of. Nimi could not believe what she was hearing. After everything she had been through, the misdiagnosis, the near betrayal, the crumbling of her personal and professional life, here was the opportunity of a lifetime being handed to her at the very moment she had reclaimed control of her company. That's incredible, Nimi said, her voice barely concealing her excitement. I've always envisioned expanding internationally, but I never imagined I would have someone like you backing me. Mr. Jaja smiled again, this time with warmth. You've earned this, Mrs. Johnson, and I believe in you. With that, he extended his hand and Nimi shook it, feeling the weight of the moment sinking. This wasn't just the reclaiming of her company. This was the start of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. Back at Riverstone Hospital, Binta's condition continued to worsen. Her once hopeful future was now overshadowed by the grim reality of her impending death. Zara, devastated by the guilt of having wished harm upon her sister in a moment of anger, struggled to cope with her emotions. She stayed by Binta's bedside day and night, hoping that somehow her presence would bring comfort in Binta's final days. Every moment was filled with regret. Regret for the cruel words she had spoken, for the tension that had come between them, and for the time she could never get back. I'm sorry, Zara whispered one night, holding Binta's hand tightly. I didn't mean what I said. I love you. I would give anything to take it all back. Binta, weak but still aware, squeezed her sister's hand softly. I know, Zara, she whispered. I forgave you the moment you said it. Life is too short to hold on to anger. Tears poured from Zara's eyes as she listened to her sister's words, filled with love and grace despite the pain. The two sisters spent those last days together, sharing stories, laughing when they could, and finding peace in the bond that had always been there, even in the midst of their arguments. Binta passed away quietly one morning, her hands still interlocked with her sister's. Zara could not contain the pain she felt in her heart, blaming herself for the death of her only sister. Though Zara carried the guilt of her angry words for the rest of her life, she found solace in knowing that Binta had forgiven her. She vowed to live her life honoring her sister's memory, choosing love and compassion over anger and resentment. In the end, both Nimi and Binta's stories were proof of the fragility of life and the importance of love, forgiveness, and loyalty. Nimi had reclaimed her life and her legacy, while Zara had found peace with her sister in their final moments. The lesson to be learned from this story is that words are powerful. It can either bring life to a person or quench their light. Be careful of what you say, because a careless word spoken can ruin a person's life forever. Everything in life happens for a reason. Never beat yourself up over things that you have no control over, but always remain positive in such situations, as a positive mind is like medicine to the soul. Last but not least, never repay good for evil, but adopt a heart of gratitude and loyalty, as these attract blessings to one's life. I hope you enjoyed the story.